dress, choose a light fabric such as a silk crepe, viscose crepe, or polyester crepe. You could also choose a stiffer fabric like a woven cotton or linen. Before starting to sew, wash your fabric and let it dry in the same way you will treat your future dress. Then press it and cut the pattern pieces. If you bought the PDF pattern, I made a video to help you recreate the pattern. Please note that to avoid wasting paper, front and back facings are included in the front and back pieces. So you have to either trace them on see-through paper or cut the front and back pieces first, then cut out the facings and cut them in the fabric. Just like so, you cut the front piece and then you take out the facing and you cut it again on its own. Then, prepare the facings with fusible interfacing and serge the outer edge to prevent from fraying. Then, pin all darts, sew and press them. The bust dart is pressed towards the bottom, and the waist darts in front and back are pressed towards the outside of the dress. Then you will need to stabilize the neckline because it's cut on the bias. If you don't, it will stretch out of shape, and there's nothing you can do once it happens. So I use a strip of silk organza, as you see, which is both sturdy and very thin, and I sew it on the wrong side in the seam allowance as close as possible to the seam line, but still it's within the seam allowance. And if you don't have silk organza, you can use fusible tape or a strip of non-stretch fusible interfacing cut in the straight of grain. Then, prepare the sleeve tie like you would prepare a bias. Here I didn't have enough fabric, so I just stitched through the middle. And I will press that seam open. So prepare it like you would prepare a bias. Fold it in half lengthwise to mark the center, then fold again each half in two. This is a way to proceed. Personally, I'm used to just press 1/4 of the ribbon towards the center, because when you're a bit used to measuring, you know where the center of the ribbon is. And then I just do the same on the opposite side. Just like so. And once it's done, fold in half again and press. In the end, your ribbon should look like a bias tape pressed into, folded into. And to finish the end, you can either tie it in a little knot, or you can open the ribbon like this and fold the end on itself, press in place, and then just fold back in half and press. Pin front facings to back facings at shoulders. See, I pressed the facings and I serged the outer edge so it looks neat. And then I pinned front facings to back facing at shoulders. Then sew. Press the seam open. Like this. And when you pressed it, trim the seam allowance on the sides. Now pin the dress front to back at shoulders and sides. Here you just pin, sew, and serge the seam. With right sides together, pin the facing to the dress. You have pinned everything, and at the bottom edge of the dress, pin the facing to the front with right sides together. Not on the hem seam line, but on the bottom line of the hem, so where the hem will finish. And slit the hem allowance just where the facing begins. Now I will sew the seam allowance on this line, and then just normally where the normal seam allowance is, all around the dress. Now let's trim the corners. Then trim the seam allowance to a few millimeters everywhere. To prevent the facing from rolling and showing on the outside of the garment, sew what remains of the seam allowance to the wrong side of the facing. This is how it looks on the right side of the facing once it is done. So I do it on the whole neckline, back and front, but I don't do it on the center front seam, because here we will have the buttons and buttonholes that will keep the facing in place anyway. Then let's make the sleeves. So here I made a bound slit. If you need help on this, please check the other video. And then insert gathering threads between each side of the slit and the side notch. So on this side and on the other side. And also on the sleeve cap, so insert gathering thread from here to here. I have inserted my gathering threads, but I won't gather right now because it's easier to first sew the side seam. Just pin, sew, and serge. Pull the gathers. Once this is done, and then take the sleeve tie. Each notch should match one side of the slit, and the center of the tie comes at the sleeve side seam. So just pin it like you would pin any kind of bias. Here my notch is marked by the pin because it was a little erased. And so you see the other pin will come on the other side of the slit. So you just pin like a regular bias, open it, and start pinning on one side of the slit with the right side of the tie on wrong side of the sleeve. So pin this first notch to the slit side, then pin the center. It's a good idea to mark the center of the tie to the side seam. And then pin the other notch to the other slit side. After that, you can pin all around the sleeve, evening the gathers, and sew. Then take the sleeve on the right side and fold the bias over the edge and over the seam you just made. Like this. And pin. Still on the right side, sew the whole tie from one end to the other end. This is my finished sleeve. Then take off the gathering threads and tie the sleeve knots. Check if the length is okay for you, and if it's not, you can just cut. And personally, I like to make a little knot to finish the tie. I think it's good. Instead of folding and pressing like I just showed before. Then gather the sleeve cap, even the gathers, and pin the sleeve to the armhole. The top notch should match the shoulder seam, and the gathers should be evenly distributed on either side of it. So even the gathers. Then sew and serge. This is my finished sleeve. Finish the hem by making a narrow hem, folding that part just near the facing, and then sew the facing in place with a few hand stitches just here within the shoulder seam line, so hidden, to prevent the facing from showing on the outside. And lastly, make buttonholes and sew buttons according to the guide or not. Feel free to innovate in the placement of buttons. I hope you like your new dress, and I can't wait to see your makes on Instagram. See you soon on French Poetry. Bye bye.